The Vanguard Empire spanned 47 star systems, a vast spider's web of dominance and fear. For 3,000 years, their grip over the galaxy had remained unchallenged. 7 species formed this ruthless coalition, each one lethal in its own fashion. The Starry ruled supreme reptilian tacticians whose icy minds could anticipate 10 moves ahead of any foe. Their scales shone like blackened steel, and their piercing yellow eyes overlooked nothing. The Vorlak were crystalline beings, able to unleash blasts of raw energy, melting through reinforced alloys with ease. The Grimmeth towered 12 feet high, their sinewed frames strong enough to rip armored transports apart. The Nexari acted as one, countless insectoid bodies moving with the intelligence of a single hive. The Morin possessed the gift of shapeshifting, assuming the likeness of anyone or anything. The Tani pried into thoughts, crushing wills with their psychic domination. The Kaith had replaced flesh with machinery, becoming faster, stronger, and nearly unstoppable. Together, these 7 races declared themselves the universe's apex predators. Every species they encountered was either enslaved to toil in mines and factories or eradicated when deemed troublesome. One law echoed through the stars, the will of the Vanguard Empire. Their colossal fleets patrolled the void, their armies enforced order on worlds beyond counting. Resistance was futile. It always ended in death, or chains. Admiral Zir of the Sakari presided in his command hall on Vex Prime, the Empire's capital. His clawed fingers drummed on the steel desk as he sifted through reports from the outer rim. A galactic projection hovered before him, green markers for Vanguard domains, red for unexplored reaches. Each year, the red dwindled as conquest pushed further into the abyss. Subcommander Vor, a younger Sakari officer, entered with a deep bow. His emerald scales glimmered, marking him barely past his first century. "Admiral, the scout fleets have returned from Sector 793 with noteworthy findings," he hissed. Zir did not raise his gaze. "Define noteworthy, Subcommander. Another mineral-rich rock to drain? Or a primitive brood to register?" His tone betrayed indifference. "They encountered a new intelligent species, Admiral. They call themselves humans, and have founded colonies on at least a dozen worlds in that sector," Vor answered, struggling to mask his eagerness. At this, Zir finally looked up, curiosity faint in his eyes. Nearly 50 years had passed since a new race had surfaced for harvest. "Technology level, Subcommander? Do they wield faster than light travel?" "Yes, Admiral," Vor confirmed. "Our scouts track their vessels traversing between stars. Their craft seem crude compared to ours, yet they are operational. The species appears to be in an incipient expansion phase." Zaktar issued a sound which might have been a sectary chuckle. How perfectly predictable. Another young race stumbling into the void, thinking they own the heavens. "What are their physical attributes?" Vorth checked his datapad. "They are bipedal mammals, Admiral. Average stature measures just under 2 meters. They possess a single head and lack natural weapons such as claws or fangs. No psychic talent detected. No energy projection capabilities. No shape-changing observed. Their technology seems focused on basic mechanical systems and chemical propulsion. In other words, they are utterly ordinary," Zektar said with dismissal clear in his voice. "Place them in Category 5 for future processing. Send the standard demand for surrender to their leadership. If they comply, we will assess their usefulness as laborers. If they resist, we will demonstrate why resistance measures futile." But Vor paused, which was unusual for a young officer. "Admiral, there is one more detail. The scouts reported some anomalous conduct during their observations, such as the humans appeared to show concern for members of other species. Admiral, on one of their colony worlds, they were observed caring for refugees from the Alari system. The Althari were a species we conquered 2 centuries ago." Zir's eyes narrowed into yellow slits. "Sheltering conquered peoples is a violation of Imperial code. These humans are harboring fugitives who fled from their rightful masters. That elevates their status to immediate threat status. Send Warrior Gorth and a full battle group to deal with this infestation before it spreads." Meanwhile, aboard the human colony ship Endeavor, Captain Jake Morrison was having his morning coffee while scanning the daily logs. The brew was dreadful because they had been in space for 6 months, but it was still coffee. His crew was small but seasoned. Navigator Officer Lisa Carter had charted courses through unmapped space for 15 years without a single loss. Chief Engineer Ryan Brooks could jury-rig anything with spare parts and relentless will. Medical Officer Amy Johnson had kept them all fit through 3 deep space missions. Tactical Specialist Kevin Price was the youngest member of the crew, but had keen eyes for potential trouble. "Captain, we are receiving a transmission from an unknown source," Lisa announced from her console. "It's coming from outside the system on a frequency I've never seen before." Jake set down his coffee cup and moved to the main viewer. "Patch it through, Lisa. Let's see who wants to talk to us." The screen stuttered, then resolved into a visage that was unmistakably non-human. The creature had black scales and yellow eyes that seemed to look right through them. When it spoke, its voice was cold and mechanical through the universal translator. "Attention, primitive species. I am Subcommander Vorth of the Vanguard Empire. Your kind has been discovered occupying territory that belongs to us. You will surrender immediately and prepare for processing. Resistance will result in your complete destruction. You have one of your planetary rotations to comply." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in complete silence. Jake looked at his crew and saw the same expression on every face. It was not fear exactly, but more like the look people get when someone tells them something so absurd they cannot quite believe it. "Well, that was rude," Amy said finally. "Did he just threaten to obliterate us if we don't surrender?" Ryan asked. "That's how it sounded," Kevin replied, monitoring his tactical readouts. Jake sank back in his captain's chair and pondered for a moment. In 40 years of life, he had met bullies before. They all used the same pattern, which was to act tough and demand submission right away. The smart response was usually to stay calm and gather more information. "Are functional. The species appears to be in an early expansion phase." Zaktar emitted a sound that might have been a sectary chuckle. How deliciously predictable. Another fledgling race stumbling into the void, convinced the stars belonged to them. "What are their physical capabilities?" Vorth consulted his datapad. "They are bipedal mammals, Admiral. Average height just under 2 meters. They possess a single head and lack natural weapons such as claws or fangs. No psychic aptitude detected. No energy projection observed. No shape-shifting. Their technology centers on basic mechanical systems and chemical propulsion. In short, entirely ordinary," Zaktar replied with clear disdain. "Assign them Category 5 for future processing. Dispatch the standard ultimatum demanding surrender to their leaders. If they comply, we will consider them useful as labor. If they resist, we will show why defiance is futile." Vor hesitated, an oddity for a young officer. "Admiral, one more item," he said. "Our scouts recorded anomalous behavior. The humans displayed concern for other species. On one colony world, they cared for refugees from the Alari system. The Altari were a people we conquered 2 centuries ago." Zier's eyes narrowed into thin yellow slits. "Sheltering conquered peoples violates imperial law. These humans harbor fugitives who fled their rightful masters. That elevates them to immediate threat status. Send War Leader Gorth with a full battle group to cleanse this infestation before it spreads." Aboard the colony ship Endeavor, Captain Jake Morrison sipped bitter coffee while scanning the morning logs. The brew was awful after 6 months in transit, but it remained coffee. His crew was small and proven. Navigator Lisa Carter had steered them through unmapped space for 15 years without error. Chief Engineer Ryan Brooks could fix anything with spares and stubbornness. Medical Officer Amy Johnson had kept them healthy across 3 deep space missions. Tactical Specialist Kevin Price was the youngest, but sharp-eyed for trouble. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission from an unknown source," Lisa called. "Outside the system, on a frequency I don't recognize." Jake set down his cup and moved to the main screen. "Patch it through, Lisa. Let's hear who's knocking." The feed stuttered and resolved into a face that was not human. Black scales, yellow eyes that pierced straight through them. When it spoke, the universal translator rendered a cold metallic cadence. "Attention, primitive species. I am Subcommander Vorth of the Vanguard Empire. Your kind has been found occupying territory that belongs to us. Surrender immediately and prepare for processing. Resistance will result in your complete annihilation. You have 1 planetary rotation to comply." The transmission cut, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Jake glanced at his crew. The same look sat on every face, not quite fear, more the expression people wear when told something too absurd to accept. "Well, that was rude," Amy said at last. "Did he just threaten to destroy us if we don't surrender?" Ryan asked. "That's what it sounded like," Kevin replied, eyes on his tactical displays. Jake leaned back in his chair and considered. In 40 years, he'd met bullies before. They all followed the same formula: bluster, demands, immediate submission. The best response was usually to stay calm and gather facts. Lisa prepared the reply on the same frequency. "Tell them we appreciate their message, but we need proof of their authority and jurisdiction before we can respond properly. Be polite but firm." "Aye, Captain," Lisa began as she drafted the transmission. What none of them realized was they'd altered history. For the first time in 3 millennia, someone had told the Vanguard Empire to produce proof instead of expecting instant surrender. The reply was so unprecedented, the Vanguard systems had no protocol to handle it. The age of human defiance had begun. 3 days passed before the Vanguard answer came, and it was not what anyone had predicted. No more messages. A colossal alien warship dropped from hyperspace above New Dakota. 5 times larger than any human construction, it bristled with strange, glowing weapons. Colony Administrator Helen Walsh watched as sensor teams scrambled to interpret the signatures. "Administrator, the alien vessel is powering weapons," Chief Scanner Doug Chen reported, fingers trembling as energy readouts scrolled. "I'm seeing at least 40 weapon ports and a shield generator output greater than our entire grid." Helen had governed New Dakota for 8 years and handled shortages. Pirates and breakdowns, but never this. The colony sheltered 30,000 souls, families and children seeking new lives. "Open a channel, Doug. Put me through." The main screen flickered and resolved into a different alien, larger, with thick armored plating and facial scars. Its voice ground like metal. "I am Warlord Gorth of the Grimth Battle Fleet. Your species ignored our surrender demand and harbors criminals of the Vanguard Empire. This transgression will be punished under Imperial law. Prepare to be destroyed." Helen stepped forward to be seen clearly. "Warlord Gorth, I am Administrator Helen Walsh of New Dakota Colony. We are not aware of violating any law, and we have not harbored criminals. Those you call criminals came to us as refugees fleeing persecution. We sheltered them because it was the right thing to do." The alien made a sound that might have been laughter, but without humor. Right and wrong are defined by strength. Human, the strong rule, the weak obey. Your species is weak. Your opinions are irrelevant. Surrender now, or we will demonstrate why resistance is impossible." "I cannot do that, Warlord," Helen answered with steadiness she did not entirely feel. "These people made their home here. I have a duty to protect them. If you want this colony, you will have to take it by force." For a moment, the alien simply stared, as if the words had no meaning in his frame. In 3,000 years, no foe had ever refused surrender under overwhelming force. They begged, bartered, negotiated, but never flatly declined. "Very well, human. Learn what happens to those who defy the Vanguard Empire." The feed cut, and the warship opened fire. Beams of pure energy lanced down, turning structures to molten slag and gouging vast craters. The colony shields held for exactly 37 seconds before collapsing in showers of sparks. The Vanguard expected panic, immediate capitulation, and the swift end of resistance. What followed was something they had never seen. Commander Tony Rodriguez of the Colonial Defense Force took charge of evacuations, while Captain Beth Thompson organized civilians into emergency response teams. Engineer Sam Miller began converting mining gear and industrial tools into improvised weapons. Rather than running in chaos, the colonists worked with a coordination that surprised even their attackers. "All civilian transports to Evac Zone 7, Tony broadcast over emergency channels. Military personnel formed defensive perimeters around the landing zones. Buy time for families to reach safety. The Vanguard's planetary assault doctrine was simple. Pulverize population centers to shatter morale, then land troops to round up survivors and assert control. The whole sequence typically finished within 6 hours. But as dropships descended toward New Dakota, they met humans firing back with weapons that should not have harmed Vanguard armor. Sam Miller. had spent 2 days turning plasma cutters into improvised cannons and mining charges into guided missiles. The weapons were crude and hazardous to handle, but they were effective enough to punch holes in Vanguard drop pods. Captain Beth Thompson led bands of colonists armed with these jury-rigged arms in swift hit-and-run strikes against the landing zones. "Remember what Sam taught us?" she yelled over the thunder of fire. "Aim for the joints in their armor and don't linger in one place. We can't outmatch them in a straight fight, but we can make them pay for every meter." The Vanguard troops were stunned to meet resistance instead of submission. Their doctrine assumed inferior species would collapse when faced with superior firepower. Yet the humans fought on even when their odds were hopeless. They adopted baffling tactics, throwing themselves away to destroy a single enemy vehicle or continuing to fire as they bled out. Warlord Gorth watched the engagement from his command vessel and felt a sensation unfamiliar in centuries: confusion. His forces were winning, of course, but they were taking losses that should have been impossible against such primitive foes. 3 dropships were destroyed and more than 50 soldiers were killed or wounded in what should have been a routine mop-up, the report said. He snarled at his tactical officer. "Sir, the humans are not responding to our psychological warfare protocols. Standard fear induction methods appear ineffective. They continue fighting even when defeat is inevitable." "Then kill them all," Gorth ordered. "If they will not surrender, they have no value as slaves." Even that proved harder than anticipated. The humans fragmented into small cells across the colony, slipping through tunnels and secret passages. They struck Vanguard patrols and vanished before reinforcements could close. They sabotaged gear, disabled vehicles, and made life intolerable for the occupiers. Dr. Lisa Parker led one such resistance cell. A xenobiologist who'd been cataloging refugee populations before the assault, she now used her knowledge of alien anatomy to find weak points in Vanguard armor and systems. "The Grimmith have enhanced muscle density, but their joints remain vulnerable," she briefed her team before an ambush. "Hit knees and elbows where plates meet. The Nexari use pheromonal signals to coordinate. If we disrupt those, they lose cohesion." After 6 hours of combat, the Vanguard controlled most of the colony, but at a cost their generals considered unacceptable. They had lost 12 dropships, over 100 soldiers, and numerous vehicles to an enemy they'd expected to crush effortlessly. Worse, scattered human groups still fought from hidden positions with no sign of surrender. Warlord Gorth made a decision that would reverberate through Vanguard High Command: commence orbital bombardment of the entire colony rather than continue a costly ground campaign. It was the first time in more than 1,000 years the Vanguard had deployed such extreme measures against a so-called primitive species. The bombardment turned New Dakota into a wasteland of glass and ash, yet reports began filtering to other human settlements, telling an impossible story. A small cadre of humans had forced the mighty Vanguard Empire to obliterate an entire world rather than accept its surrender. The message was unmistakable. Humans did not break easily, and they would fight back against extinction or chains. News of New Dakota raced through human space like wildfire, and wherever it spread, it carried the same warning. The Vanguard could be wounded, and humans would not go quietly. The war had begun. Word reached Earth within 48 hours and produced a sight no historian had ever recorded. Every nation halted its internecine wars and turned to a single looming threat. President Maria Gonzalez convened an emergency session of the Global Assembly. Representatives from every country voted unanimously to form the Terran Defense Force. General William Adams, a veteran of 3 colonial campaigns, was appointed to lead with virtually unlimited authority and resources. The mobilization that followed was unprecedented. Automobile plants retooled to produce armored vehicles. Cargo shipyards began building warships. Mining operations shifted from civilian extraction to military production. Within weeks, human space had been converted into a war economy with a single objective: survival against an enemy that had never known defeat. Dr. Rachel Kim led the most critical program. Reverse engineering captured Vanguard hardware. The wreckage from New Dakota supplied the first samples of alien weapons, shields, and armor. Her teams worked day and night in secured labs trying to decode how the enemy's gear functioned. "What we've found changes everything we believed about warfare," Rachel told General Adams during a briefing at the main research facility. "Vanguard tech is staggeringly advanced, but it has a fundamental flaw." "What flaw?" Adams asked, eyes fixed on the holographic schematics. "They're optimized for efficiency and fail-safe operation," Rachel explained, her smile thin and not entirely friendly. "Every weapon has safety interlocks to prevent catastrophic failure. Shield generators will automatically shut down to avoid overload. Vehicles rely on redundant systems to preserve crew. That's their weakness." "How so?" Adams pressed. "They've never faced an enemy willing to disable those safeguards," Rachel said. "We can push their weapons beyond designed limits. We can force shields into catastrophic collapse. We can turn their own engineering against them in ways they never conceived." Intelligence Director Carl Watson pursued a complementary path. His analysts had tapped Vanguard communications and mapped their military architecture. What they discovered was an empire built on rigid hierarchy and time-honored predictability. Vanguard commanders all followed the same strategic doctrine, a manual unchanged for centuries. "They're arrogant," Carl reported to the Defense Council. "They broadcast unencrypted plans because they assume no primitive species could intercept or understand them. We've cracked their codes. We can forecast their moves days ahead." The Vanguard, meanwhile, wrestled with an unfamiliar problem, an enemy that adapted after every engagement. Admiral Czar found himself confronting tactics and improvisations that did not fit any of the old templates. Humans who learned, changed, and fought with an unpredictability their manuals could not teach. Received reports from dozens of systems where human colonies had repelled Vanguard assaults using ever more sophisticated tactics. The humans were no longer merely resisting, they were winning. "How is this possible?" Starr demanded of his staff. "These primitives should have been crushed in the opening wave. Instead, they're destroying our vessels and killing our soldiers with weapons cobbled from mining gear." Warlord Gorth stood before Vanguard High Command, his face drawn and older than weeks should allow. "The humans do not fight like any species we've faced," he reported. "They show no regard for their own safety and will sacrifice themselves to destroy a single enemy unit. They constantly adapt tactics and never repeat the same method twice. Most unsettling, they appear to enjoy combat in a way that borders on the inexplicable." The truth was harsher. Humans had discovered something about themselves they'd never fully understood. Faced with annihilation, they did not break, bargain, or submit. They became far more dangerous than the Vanguard had expected. They became creative. Captain Peter Yang commanded the defense of the Mars orbital stations when the first major Vanguard fleet reached the solar system. Outnumbered 10-1 and outgunned by an even larger margin, he should, by every manual in existence, have attempted retreat or surrender to preserve his forces. Instead, he ordered his ships to ram the enemy at full burn. The Battle of Mars lasted 6 hours. When the smoke cleared, both fleets lay wrecked. Yet the humans had achieved the impossible. They stopped a Vanguard advance by sheer determination and the willingness to trade lives for enemy hulls. Strategically, the cost was appalling, but the message echoed across both human and Vanguard space. Humans would rather die fighting than live as slaves. Admiral Susan Clark took charge of Earth's last defenses as Vanguard reinforcements loomed. Her fleet was a patchwork of hastily converted civilian craft crewed by volunteers who'd never seen battle. Many ships bore weapons so crude they were little more than heavy projectile launchers. Still, Clark commanded something the Vanguard had not counted on: 3 million volunteers who answered the call to protect their world. "I know you're frightened," Clark broadcast as enemy formations appeared at the system edge. "Our odds look grim and our arms seem inadequate, but remember this: every human who ever lived fought through impossible odds just to survive another day. Our ancestors crawled from caves, crossed oceans in wooden boats, built cities, and reached for the stars in tin cans. We are survivors. Today we prove that spirit endures. The Vanguard Armada that struck Earth was the greatest military force in galactic memory. Over 2,000 warships, backed by swarms of fighters and assault craft, descended expecting to end the war in one cataclysmic blow. Instead, they found a system turned into the largest trap ever devised. Asteroids had been hollowed and packed with explosives. Space stations were refortified as bastions. Civil transports were armed with improvised ordnance. Humans had not merely prepared to defend Earth, they had prepared to make the Vanguard pay a price so grave it would break their will to continue. Commander Alex Stone led the first wave of suicide strikes in converted civilian vessels loaded with nuclear payloads. His final transmission cut across both fleets as his passenger liner plunged into a Vanguard dreadnought. For New Dakota and for everyone who comes after us. The detonation burned like a newborn star and took 3 enemy ships with it. It was the first of hundreds of such attacks as ordinary people became guided missiles aimed at the enemy's heart. Shopkeepers, teachers, and farmers died alongside career soldiers, united in defense of their species. Yet as the battle wore on, the humans grew not only desperate, but clever. Their assaults became coordinated and tactics evolved in real time. Vessels that should have been lost survived by clever use of debris fields and energy shadows. Dr. Lisa Martinez, who'd been developing experimental shield tech when the invasion began, now directed the planetary defense grid from deep inside Earth's crust via quantum links the Vanguard could not jam. Her voice threaded through the chaos, offering targeting solutions and tactical updates that turned suicidal runs into devastating ambushes. Vanguard Cruiser Group 7 is attempting to flank our line, she informed fleet commanders. All units execute Maneuver Delta and converge on my coordinates. Aim for engine ports. Their shields are weakest there. The Vanguard had expected to crush human resistance with raw force. Instead, they were trapped in the bloodiest conflict of their empire's history. For every human ship destroyed, 2 more seemed to replace it. For every human life snuffed out, 10 more surged forward to take its place. At the battle's peak, something unprecedented happened in 3,000 years of Vanguard rule. Their fleet began to withdraw, not simply due to losses, but because they faced an enemy that would not cease fighting, no matter how hopeless the circumstance. Earth's defense had cost humanity nearly everything, but it had achieved a seismic result. For the first time ever, the Vanguard Empire had been forced to withdraw from an engagement, not because of superior firepower, but because of superior will. The tale spread through the galaxy on the tongues of survivors from countless conquered worlds. Apex predators could be wounded. Humans had proven they could make them retreat. The age of Vanguard dominance was ending, and something new began rising from the ashes of their victims. The retreat from Earth sent shockwaves through the Vanguard Empire that reached every outlying territory. For the first time in 3 millennia, subjugated peoples began whispering about revolt. The Alari, enslaved for 2 centuries, sabotaged mining installations. The peaceful Zephyrians refused to work in Vanguard factories. Even the shattered remnants of the Corvani warrior caste remembered the taste of freedom. Admiral Czar found himself tasked with an impossible war, fighting on multiple fronts while repression flared across his domains. The Vanguard war machine that had once seemed unstoppable was stretched thin across dozens of systems trying to hold populations that had lost their fear. Worse still, the Vanguard were starting to turn on one another. The Grimmeth demand immediate reinforcement of the Outer Rim territories. Subcommander Vorth reported during the daily briefing on Vex Prime. Warlord Gorth claims human raids are severing their supply lines and crippling operations. Zaktar's voice carried the tone of a man bracing for bad news. And what of the Nexari hive mind? He asked. They request additional fleet support for their core worlds. Human psychological attacks are disrupting their collective consciousness and causing command failures. Zaktar made a sound of pure disgust. The 7 species that comprised the Vanguard had cooperated for centuries because each contributed unique strengths to the alliance, but they retained distinct identities and competing interests. Under pressure from human rebellion, those old rivalries resurfaced. The humans, meanwhile, had discovered a truth that would prove decisive. The vanguard was not a single monolithic force, but 7 proud species bound together by arrogance and mutual advantage. Captain Joe Mitchell led the newly formed Psychological Operations Division, charged with turning those divisions against one another. The Talani psychics pride themselves on mental supremacy, Mitchell explained to his specialists. The Kaith worship their cybernetic upgrades. The Grimmeth honor only brute strength and scorn the others as weak. We can weaponize those prejudices. Dr. Laura White's labs became a grim workshop where captured Vanguard tech was dissected and repurposed. She produced sonic scramblers that shredded Nexari pheromone networks, EMP arrays that fried Kaith implants, and pheromone bombs designed to send Talani telepaths into uncontrollable frenzy. Each species evolved to be the perfect predator in its niche, Laura demonstrated to General Adams as she unveiled a new device. But specialization breeds brittleness. They excel at their advantage and forget how to adapt. The first major test of these doctrines came at the Battle of Kepler Station, where a combined Vanguard fleet sought to sever human supply lines. Commander Danny Johnson led a mixed armada of human vessels and captured alien hulls into a fight that would become the most unorthodox engagement in military annals. Rather than strike head-on, Johnson fed the enemy tailored psychological bait. He broadcast fake distress signals claiming a panicked human rout. The Grimmeth charged to pursue what they assumed were fleeing foes, stretching their formation and exposing flanks. "All units, focus the Grimmeth," Johnson ordered. "Make it look like we're concentrating fire on them." The Grimmeth took heavy punishment and cried for aid. Meanwhile, the Tani detected phony psychic signatures human ships broadcast and convinced themselves the battle was an illusion meant to trap them. The Kaith's combat algorithms judged the field suboptimal and withdrew to recalibrate, fracturing the Vanguard fleet within hours into 7 quarrelsome detachments. The humans then picked apart the isolated elements one by one with tactics tailored to each species' weakness. It was a victory that should have been impossible on paper, but human ingenuity had turned enemy strengths into fatal flaws. Admiral Nancy Parker then launched Operation Wildfire to replicate Kepler's success across human-held space. Her forces struck Vanguard positions simultaneously in 17 systems, using the same divide-and-conquer playbook. The psychological campaign worked so well that Vanguard units began, "Make them think," Parker told her staff officers. "The Vanguard has spent 3,000 years reacting by instinct and following fixed patterns. When we force them to actually consider their choices, they err because they're not practiced at adapting under pressure." The consequences of those victories reached far beyond battlefield gains. Across Vanguard space, the subjugated began to glimpse a truth they had been taught to deny. The apex predators were not invulnerable. They could be confused, divided, and defeated by an enemy that refused to play by conventional rules. Captain Greg Foster led humanitarian convoys to prison worlds where the Vanguard had kept slaves and dissidents for centuries. His ships arrived not as conquerors, but as liberators, offering refuge and the chance to join the rising rebellion. The response overwhelmed expectations. Entire populations rose up. "We are not here to replace one empire with another," Foster broadcast to liberated worlds. "We are here to give you choice. Fight with us or live free. The choice is yours." Commander Linda Ross coordinated with resistance networks that had lain dormant for decades. Her intelligence cells supplied the rebellion with enemy movement reports and vulnerability maps while broadcasting subversive messages that sparked more uprisings. The message was simple and potent. Freedom is possible, and humans proved it can be won. Vanguard High Command watched their dominion unravel with mounting alarm. Loyal client species now attacked supply depots and proclaimed independence. Trade lanes once secure became hunting grounds for human raiders. Resource worlds vital to the war effort erupted in revolt. "We are losing this war," Warlord Gorth admitted at an emergency council. "Not because the humans overpower us, but because they have shown our subjects that resistance works. Every victory inspires 10 more uprisings." The Vorlak delegate pulsed in angry surges. "Then we must prove resistance leads only to annihilation. Ready the planet killers for deployment." "And if word of that reaches every world?" asked the Nexari spokesman, his 1,000 voices merging into a single urgent tone. "Every species will unite against us, knowing we will exterminate them all. We risk facing not only humans, but the entire living galaxy." A Talani psychic closed her many eyes and concentrated. "I sense fear spreading through our ranks. Doubt saps combat effectiveness. The humans have accomplished what we deemed impossible. They have made us afraid." Admiral Zier listened, frustration coiling within him. The Vanguard had long ruled by absolute force and the certainty that resistance was futile. Humans had shattered that certainty, and with it the Empire's foundations began to crack. "Very well," he said at last. "We will marshal our remaining fleets for a final assault on the human homeworld. If Earth falls, the rebellion will collapse and order will be restored. Prepare every ship, weapon, and soldier for total war. We stake the Empire's future on this battle." Orders rippled through Vanguard space, calling vessels and warriors from every system. It would be the largest military operation in galactic memory, and its outcome would decide whether the era of Vanguard supremacy endured or ended. Yet as the mighty armada gathered, the humans readied their own surprise, honed from hard lessons and bitter losses, forged into one last test. The final Vanguard armada assembled at the edge of human space like a storm bank of death. 5,000 warships from across the Empire, the greatest force ever mustered. Every species contributed its heaviest hulls and finest warriors. Planet-killer devices, capable of cracking worlds, hung in formation like metal spears aimed at humanity's heart. Admiral Chris Davis stood on the bridge of the human flagship and watched the enemy array through the view screen. His combined fleet looked fragile by comparison, barely 800 vessels, many of which carried something the Vanguard never anticipated. 3 years of battle-hardened experience against an enemy that had never adapted. "All ships. This is Admiral Davis," he broadcast. "Today we face the largest military force in galactic history, commanded by species who have crushed every opponent they ever met. They believe numbers and firepower guarantee victory. They will soon learn humans do not surrender and we do not break. Whatever happens today, we fight to the end." Colonel Mary Garcia oversaw the battle plan from deep inside Kepler Station, now a fortress bristling with weapons. Her tactical screen mapped the position of every vessel as the fleets closed. Outnumbered 6-1, Garcia had prepared for months. "Execute Battle Plan Omega," she ordered. "Civilians, begin evacuation. Military, prepare for close-quarters combat. The Vanguard expect long-range war where they hold the advantage. We're going to make this personal." Engineer Frank Lewis had pushed his teams beyond sanity. Engines were modified to run at double capacity. Weapons overcharged to fire faster and hit harder than their frames could bear. Every ship was a time bomb, but that was the strategy. "The Vanguard build for eternity," Lewis told his exhausted crews. "Their ships are meant to last centuries, and their crews expect to survive. We build to win now, even if it kills us. That difference will decide this war." The battle began at maximum range, beams tearing across the void, dreadnoughts launching planet killers, smaller craft dueling at impossible distances. For the first hour, it looked like every battle recorded in history. Then the humans did the unthinkable. They charged. Accelerating to maximum speed, they hurled themselves at the enemy lines. Captain Steve Parker led the first wave. His crippled destroyer turned into a guided missile. His final words echoed through both fleets. "For everyone who comes after us, and everyone who came before." His ship slammed into a carrier, triggering chain explosions that ripped through 3 more vessels. It was the signal every human ship followed. Vessels that should have withdrawn rammed enemy hulls. Crews that should have abandoned ship stayed aboard, steering wrecks into enemy formations. Commander Julie Adams directed medical rescues amid chaos, her ships plucking survivors and redeploying them into battle. "Rescue 7 to any vessel," she broadcast. "We have Captain Morrison and 12 crew, ready for immediate transfer to anyone needing veterans." The Vanguard watched in horror. They were winning on paper, more kills, more casualties, but losing something greater, the will to fight. Against an enemy that weaponized death itself, even victory felt like defeat. Warlord Gorth, surrounded by failing displays, shouted, "Concentrate fire on the human flagship. Destroy their command and their fleet will crumble. But humans had adapted. When Davis's flagship fell, Garcia took command from Kepler Station. When the station was silenced, Captain Jake Morrison stepped up. Every officer trained to assume command. Every crew knew the plan. Coordination never faltered. The vanguard, under pressure, fell into their oldest flaw. The Grimmeth charged for glory, the Kaith calculated from distance. The Tani tried psychic dominance, and the Nexari struggled with pheromone signals, signals humans jammed mercilessly. Dr. Sarah Kim, intercepting comms, unleashed the final blow, misinformation. The Grimmeth believe the Kaith are abandoning them. The Tani think the Nexari want all the glory. Their formation is collapsing, she reported. Admiral Zier watched centuries of dominance unravel. Species that had fought side by side for millennia now turned weapons on each other. 3,000 years of victory had bred arrogance, not unity. Under real defeat, the alliance shattered. Hold formation. Do not fire on allies, Zier screamed. But it was too late. Suspicion rotted discipline, and vanguard vessels tore each other apart. The battle raged 18 hours. By its end, both fleets lay in ruin, but the vanguard empire was broken. Humans had prevailed not through superior firepower, but through indomitable will and an unrivaled grasp of their enemies' weaknesses. The news spread across the stars, carried by battered survivors from both sides. 6 months later, Admiral Jake Morrison stood before the First Galactic Council, humanity seated as equals with dozens of liberated species, and even the 7 former apex predators. No longer conquerors, they were learning to coexist. The age of empire is over, Morrison declared. Today begins the age of cooperation. Every world has the right to choose its destiny. We humans learned something fighting the vanguard. True strength isn't being the biggest predator. It's refusing to surrender when hope is gone. Across the galaxy, the conquered rebuilt their worlds. The former predators found new paths. Sectari as scientists, Grimmeth as protectors. Strength was no longer domination, but contribution. The galaxy had learned, power means nothing against a species that refuses to accept defeat. Humanity had proven it.